The Sega Saturn and Model 2, despite their huge gulf in performance, kind of go hand in hand. You see, Sega decided to lavish Saturn owners with port after port of the very best its brand new arcade board had to offer, and while some results were less polished than others, it was still amazing to see these cutting edge machines scaled down to fit onto a humble Sega Saturn compact disc. It's hard to put into words just how amazing it was to visit Booth's Arcade on a Saturday and see the latest Sega games, knowing full well that a port was coming to the Saturn sat hooked up to the TV in your bedroom. These ports still hold a special place in our hearts, and when Dan and I met up for the first time at Arcade Club in Bury in late 2023, we couldn't resist the Model 2 games on offer. We love these games in the arcade, we love them on the Saturn, and even today we continue to play these games day in, day out. Which brings me to the point of today's video, because we also love the SAROO here at the SEGAGuys. Over the last 12 months, we've watched it grow from some obscure cartridge with limited compatibility and functionality into a serious contender for the Sega Saturn optical drive emulator of choice for the majority of retro gamers. We've covered it extensively here on the channel, with setup guides, comparison videos, and even a full-length podcast discussion. To put it bluntly, if you have any interest in the SAROO for the Sega Saturn, you won't find better or more in-depth content anywhere else. But one of the best features of SAROO, of course, is the load times, or should I say the lack of them. Dan the Mega Driver recently completed what can only be described as a forensic examination of the SNK titles running on SAROO, comparing the load times with those on both Fenrir and, when possible, his original CD versions. So in this video, I'm going to focus on another group of games, ones which push the system further and harder than those by SNK and Capcom, and of course I'm talking about Sega's Model 2 ports. The one thing we all love about arcade games though, aside from the flashy visuals and the loud noises of course, is the instantaneous nature of the gameplay. You pop your pound coin in, you hit start, and within seconds you're fighting, driving or shooting. The vast majority of Saturn's Model 2 ports were impressive for the host hardware, and most of the time they did a fantastic job of bringing the arcade experience into the home. But now, thanks to SAROO, they're even better. With dramatically reduced load times, these games on Saturn are now closer than ever to the instantaneous experience that we enjoyed in the arcade. But just how close are we talking? Let's find out. In this video, comparisons will be made with Fenrir, which loads as fast as a fresh out the box Saturn, and the SAROO is running in my Japanese Saturn, while the Fenrir is in my 60Hz switched PAL console. I've done my best to press start on the attract mode and title screens at the exact same time on both systems, but at the end of the day, this is just a bit of fun. The games will be shown in alphabetical order, so let's get things rolling. See what I did there? With the one and only Daytona USA. Daytona divided opinion when it released on Saturn back in 1995, in fact it still divides opinion today. Regardless, SAROO is off to a flyer here, with 5.4 seconds from boot to the attract mode, with the Fenrir Saturn being way behind, taking 17.3 seconds in comparison. From the title screen, which includes navigating the menu, selecting your car and your transmission type, SAROO had you racing in 13.2 seconds, Fenrir by comparison taking over 20 seconds to get you to gameplay. On SAROO, you're almost 10 seconds into the first lap by the time Fenrir has started the race. Performance wise, I noticed absolutely no issues when running on SAROO. No graphical glitches, no sound issues and no crashes. Well, unless you count me power sliding into the wall on the final bend of 3.7 Speedway. The Saturn port of Dead or Alive remains one of the best games on the system to this day, taking inspiration from Virtua Fighter 2 with its high resolution mode and 60 FPS gameplay. SAROO takes a mere 5 seconds to show players the attract mode, with a further 8.5 seconds between the title screen and starting the game. On the Fenrir Saturn it took 14 seconds to get to the attract mode FMV, so again, SAROO has players in the game long before Fenrir has even asked the player to press start. When lining up the footage on both systems, SAROO takes just 3.1 seconds to load the next stage, with Fenrir taking 8.5 seconds, The SAROO's near 5.5 second speed boost makes Dead or Alive on Saturn feel like a proper arcade experience, and unlike the PS1 version, which is based on the Capcom/Sony JAMA board which powers Dead or Alive++, it remains the definitive port of the 5th generation. Moving on now to Fighting Vipers, which in my opinion is one of the most underrated fighters on the Saturn, and one which deserves a lot more respect and appreciation. 6.1 seconds is all it takes SAROO to show you the title screen, with a further 8.2 seconds to get through the menus and into the game. Fenrir by comparison is 13.5 seconds to show the title screen, so the trend is becoming clear. SAROO has players playing the game by the time Fenrir gets to the title screen. Getting through the menus and into the game on Fenrir took a further 13.2 seconds, bringing its total load time to just under 27 seconds, which admittedly is hardly slow, especially when you're old enough to remember loading games on the Spectrum from an audio cassette. But again, SAROO just brings the experience that little bit closer to the arcade. Likewise, when you load the next fight, SAROO has you brawling again in just over 2 seconds, with Fenrir clocking in at just over 5 seconds. Again, it's not brutally slow, but it's not like standing in front of the arcade cabinet. Last Bronx, one of my absolute favourite games on Saturn, and one which is criminally overlooked and misunderstood. It's an incredibly deep fighter with clever weapons mechanics, and button mashing will see you blocked and countered with ease. Back in the day, Last Bronx duped many a reviewer into saying the game had full 3D backgrounds, but in actual fact it's just very clever and advanced use of VDP2. Again, SAROO has you on the title screen in just over 5 seconds, with Fenrir taking 3 times as long, coming in on 15 seconds. Working through the menus and getting into the fight takes SAROO another 8 seconds, with Fenrir taking 17 seconds. This makes Last Bronx the most impressive Model 2 port on SAROO performance-wise thus far, and when moving into the next stage, SAROO clocks in at just under 2.5 seconds, with Fenrir 3 seconds behind. Now we pass the checkpoint and move on to Manx TT Superbike, ported to the Saturn by Tantalus, a name that you'll hear again in this video, and a game that gets unfairly criticised for only having 2 tracks, which is still one more than the original Ridge Racer. Manx TT is one of the slower games to get to the title screen on SAROO, taking almost 9.5 seconds. With no attract mode to contend with, we work our way through the menus and into the game in just over 18 seconds. Fenrir again shows the title screen a lot slower, coming in at 16 seconds, and we're through the menus and passing those checkpoints in a whopping 26.5 seconds. So while, as expected, SAROO is far quicker than Fenrir, it's nowhere near arcade fast in terms of load times, especially compared to what we've seen in previous games so far, and with no stages to progress through, our comparison ends here. Here we go, the king. It's Sega Rally Championship, and can it get us back on track? Haha, after Manx TT limped over the line. On SAROO, we see the attract mode after just 9 seconds. 12 seconds later, we've worked our way through the menus, selected our cars and our transmission, and we are racing. Fenrir in the meantime took over 21 seconds to show us the attract mode, so that's a massive gain right there on SAROO. It takes another 19 seconds to get through the menus and load Desert Stage on Fenrir, giving us a total time on Fenrir of 40 seconds compared to just 21 on SAROO. When finishing Desert Stage, Forest is loaded on SAROO in just over 3 seconds, with Fenrir needing 8. Sega Rally on SAROO is a game changer. It was already one of the Saturn's very best games, but with these load times it brings the arcade experience even closer to home. We move on now to one of my guilty pleasures on the Saturn. In fact, no, I don't feel guilty. I loved SEGA Touring Car back in the day, and I love it now, and I won't hear a bad word about the music, which if I played it would get the video a copyright strike. Anyway, SEGA Touring Car is an interesting one because it has a qualifying stage before the main race, so we've got some more times to look at here. On SAROO, we're on the title screen in 10 seconds, and 19 seconds later we've chosen our car, our transmission, and we're on the grid for that qualifying lap. Fenrir took 18 seconds for the title screen and a staggering 27 seconds to get to that starting grid for qualifying. So far we're seeing SEGA Touring Car almost mirror Manx TT's performance on both consoles. On the qualifying summary screen, there's a delay in when you can press start that allows you to skip it, and I've lined both consoles up at that exact point. From here, neither SAROO or Fenrir show anywhere near arcade quality load times, with SAROO needing 14.5 seconds and Fenrir close behind on just over 17 seconds. Again, decent gains on SAROO, but nowhere near arcade level in terms of load times. Right, hands up, I bet none of you expected to see this one on here. Come on, admit it. Who's heard of Sky Target? Running on the first iteration of the Model 2 board and developed by the same AM1 team behind Wing War on the Model 1 board, Sky Target is considered part of the Afterburner franchise. SAROO has us on the title screen in 8 seconds, and 34 seconds later we are dogfighting and engaged in combat. Now, the caveat to this is that I've included the 17-second cutscene that shows your jet taking off from the aircraft carrier. All that's missing is the Top Gun soundtrack. On Fenrir, it's 19 seconds until we see the title screen, and 52 seconds until we're riding into the danger zone. Again, the caveat being that I've left the aircraft carrier cutscene intact, but that's still 35 seconds of loading time. On SAROO, we still get glimpses of the loading screen, but they're gone as fast as they appear. And at this point, we're further into the comparison, and there's still no performance issues to speak of on SAROO. Now we move on to another Tantalus port, and one which again is much maligned, but is actually great fun and keeps the core gameplay of the arcade at heart. It's the House of the Dead, but this one screams on SAROO. No pun intended. Well, okay, maybe just a bit. Boot up to title screen takes just 6 seconds on SAROO, and 4.5 seconds later we're in the game. Absolutely amazing performance here on SAROO. Fenrir, by comparison, took 22 seconds to get to the title screen and a further 16.5 seconds to get to the game. I made sure that I took the same route when recording my Fenrir gameplay as I did when playing on SAROO, because our next test was the mid-level load times as we move between areas of the level. When lining the footage up, we can see that SAROO takes just under 1.5 seconds to load the next part of the level. There's a minimal pause in the action, whereas Fenrir has you looking at the red hold your fire screen for over 6 seconds, which really does break up the gameplay and detract from the experience. And if anyone says, what more than those textures?
Shut when you think about it.
We're heading into the final stretch now, and up next is Virtua Cop, the second of the big 3 to feature on this video so far. On SAROO, we hit the attract mode after just 7 seconds, with a further 11 seconds to get through the menu and load the first stage, the Arms Black Market, with 6 of those seconds spent looking at the actual loading screen. On Fenrir, it took a less impressive 22.5 seconds to get to the attract mode, and a further 19 seconds to get through the menu and load that first stage. In fact, by the time the Fenrir Saturn had loaded the first stage, I'd taken out 10 bad guys on the SAROO Saturn. As with Daytona and Manx TT, you don't automatically progress to the next stage or track, you have to manually select it from a menu, which means that we've no actual load times between stages to record on Virtua Cop, but the load time levels for each stage were the same when coming from that selection menu. Virtua Cop 2 raised the bar in almost every way. Better visuals, greater texture mapping, larger levels, branching paths, more varied enemy types. Virtua Cop 2 remains without doubt one of the Saturn's finest arcade ports, arguably up there with both Virtua Fighter 2 and Sega Rally. On SAROO we're 6 seconds to the title screen and 11 seconds to the gameplay, including navigating the menu. So far we're on par with the first game here. The Fenrir Saturn showed an improvement over the first game, loading almost 5 seconds faster, coming in at 17 seconds to show the title screen. Navigating the menus and loading the first stage took almost 18.5 seconds on Fenrir, again an improvement on the performance of the first game, but as has been a common trait with games that run on SAROO, we've loaded the game and started playing in the time it takes Fenrir to show that title screen. And here it is, the Saturn's biggest selling title globally, in my opinion the finest technical achievement of the 5th generation, the mighty Virtua Fighter 2. On SAROO, Virtua Fighter 2 is a near arcade perfect loading experience, under 5.5 seconds to the title screen and just 9 seconds to get through the menus and take on Lau on round 1. Again, you're playing on SAROO before Fenrir has even shown you the title screen, which takes 3 times as long on Fenrir at 15 seconds and a further 14 seconds before the action begins. Lining the footage up on Akira's victory pose, we can check out the load times during the transition to the next stage, and again, SAROO delivers arcade standard load times here at just 2 seconds. Yes, 2 seconds! You barely get a chance to see that try next stage screen. Fenrir, to be fair, isn't too bad at 4.5 seconds, but it's still twice as slow as it is on SAROO. Okay, one game to go, and unfortunately we aren't going to go out with a bang here because, well, Virtua Fighter 2 set a gold standard, Virtua Lawn is a mixed bag, and on SAROO is the only game to throw up some issues. Just over 8 seconds to the title screen on SAROO versus 14 on Fenrir, which includes a screen that asks you to choose between the controller and twin sticks. After pressing start, SAROO took a further 5 seconds to show the mech select screen, which was part of a 31 seconds it took to load the first fight. Fenrir's times were 14 seconds to title, 7 seconds to mech select, and a total of 35.5 seconds to the first fight. Nowhere as impressive a showing for SAROO here. To make matters worse, the sound is hideous on SAROO. It's painfully distorted, as are sound effects and voice clips, which completely detracts from the experience. I also noticed some mild slowdown and sluggishness when playing on SAROO, which made Virtua Lawn feel unresponsive at times, and that's not a criticism you can throw at that game. But there we have it, 13 Model 2 ports on SAROO versus Fenrir and disc-based Saturns. Again, we can use Fenrir as a comparison for disc-based Saturns because it's an ODE and it emulates the disc drive and runs at the speed of a brand new, out-the-box Sega Saturn console. Basically, the disc drive at optimal performance. So does SAROO deliver arcade-class load times for Model 2 games on the Sega Saturn then? Well, yes and no. The answer is dependent on the title being run, and in a way, that sums up SAROO perfectly. Everything is on a game-by-game basis, and while Virtua Fighter 2 and the House of the Dead absolutely blew me away with their speed gains, the likes of Manx TT and Virtua Lawn were disappointing. But we're only looking for those near instantaneous load times compared to the arcade. In every single comparison, SAROO was faster than Fenrir, which we'd come to expect, but the results were so varied for each game, and Virtua Lawn aside, I experienced absolutely no crashes, glitches or strange issues. If you've made it to the end, thank you so much for sticking with us, and hopefully you've enjoyed this in-depth comparison and look at Saturn's Model 2 games on the SAROO. This has been James the SEGAHolic of the Sega Guys. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, we'll see you on the Sega side.